Today we're going to talk about should you move to Japan? I honestly get this question quite a lot. I can't lie. Like people will ask me like, what's it like to move to Japan, or should I move to Japan? How do I move to Japan? Um, and I'm just going to give my experience. Please keep in mind that this is my personal experience. So um, whatever I say is not going to be the same for you. These are just my thoughts. Full disclaimer, they're just thoughts. They're no facts are backed up by this. So yeah, my first topic I want to talk on is like when people want to move here, they forget about the culture shock. Um, for me personally, I did actually experience culture shock. I knew exactly what I was getting into actually, because I traveled here quite a bit, and I think personally, at least, my ability to adapt to new environments or to a different culture is very high. Because I mean, in Australia, from the area I'm from, there is so many different cultures and races and everything that like I've adopted so many different cultures in my life already that just adopting another one didn't actually change much for me, and adopting a whole nother culture was very, natural for me in that sense. So I'm probably lucky in the sense of where I grew up, um, and like how I was raised and everything, to be able to accept culture very easily, to be a part of a lot of other cultures other than my own, very young and very early on. So I think the biggest challenge for most people, this is not going to be from my experience, but I'll talk about for most people. Um, the biggest challenge you're going to face is obviously the language barrier. You have to learn Japanese. That's just how it is. If you're going to live here anyway, at least enough to like greet, or enough to be polite. So things like "sumimasen," "gomenasai," "kudasai," "onegaishimasu." Uh, all these kinds of words you're going to need to know. Thank you, arigato gozaimasu, otsukaresama desu. All these kinds of words you're going to need to know, like the very basic words you're going to need to know. Um, just because you need these to be more polite, especially in Japan. So I guess the biggest thing for culture shock for others is going to definitely be the language change. I would also say that the other culture shock most people are going to experience is how isolated I guess you will feel, because um, I feel like depending on the country you come from, but from Western countries, I feel like the you always like know what people are really saying because you know the language, right? Or at least you have like social interaction outside your house, like at the store or wherever it might be. I don't think that happens for many people in Japan if you are introverted. Um, so for myself, I mean, this is not from personal experience because I didn't really experience this, but for most people, you're going to struggle with feeling isolated because you're not going to be able to communicate for the first part. In addition to not being able to communicate, there's a lot of cultural differences between, I guess, in religion, in the ways you eat, and all those kinds of things, right? So I think that's number one is going to be you're going to be culture shocked coming here um, when you move, and you have to bear that in mind because it does probably, because I can't speak from my experience, but it probably does take a toll on people. I have heard it's taken tolls on people before. Obviously, I've seen videos about it, and I've talked to people that it's happened to. But for me personally, it's never happened. I think that the difference for a lot of people is whether you've come from a place that doesn't have much culture, or you've come from a place that is very cultural, um, and that changes your view, I think, or your adaptability to pick up on new things. Um, so that's number one. If you are wanting to move, I want you to bear that in mind. The second part of it is, I guess, uh, what's the second part? It's hard for people. I guess probably we can go more in depth about isolation. This, again, I can't speak from experience. This is my personal thoughts about the topic, and from what I've heard, not from what I've experienced. So, as a foreigner, um, you are going to feel very isolated in terms of not being able to communicate. this is like number one for like everything. Communication is probably number one for all of it. But yeah, you're not gonna feel connected, I guess, in a sense, because it's very hard to make friends, especially if you're introverted or you don't like going out. And if you don't drink as well, it's also going to be very difficult for you. And that comes into play with, people that are of different religions and things like that. So Muslims, they're unable to drink. So I think that already cuts out like a big chunk of social interaction. And a lot of my friends are Muslim, but there is actually a very large Muslim community in Japan. So I think you'll be able to find your community in that sense for the Muslim culture, right? But for, I guess, on the other flip side of that is like for introverts or people that don't like socializing, it's going to be very hard for you to feel included in anything really, or you're going to feel very uh, isolated, even more so than what you probably already do. Because I think a lot of people move to Japan to escape something. And if you're doing that, I recommend highly not to do that. For one, you need to be in a good place mentally to move here. And I don't recommend it to escape problems. That's definitely a bad idea, in my opinion. I came here, I was completely happy in Australia, but I came here just because, I'm in a good place mentally. I want to see what I'm capable of, how adaptable I am, and experience a whole new culture, experience new life, learn new things about myself, about a different place, different country. But when you move to escape something, especially introvert, even though you feel isolated already, when you move to Japan, you are going to feel even more isolated than what you currently did. So please don't move for the thought that you are going to be better off. Also, it's like the thing where you're isolated. You may think that's a great thing. No one knows you. You're going to be isolated. And introvert, you still are like, that's fine by me. I can stay home all day and something. But I don't think you realize just how impactful even small interactions are. Like when you go to the shop or go to get food or something, you have that small communication, right? But here you're not going to have that at all. And that makes a huge difference between isolation and like feeling completely like unheard. So keep that in mind too if you're moving here, especially if you're introverted. For me, obviously, as you guys tell from most of my videos, I'm very extroverted. So like fitting in and finding my own community was not that challenging for me. Um, and I made a lot of friends very, very quickly. I usually am able to in most instances. But yeah, you gotta take into consideration your lifestyle when you move here, and the reason you're moving here is also a very big one. So yeah, that's my second point of move when you move here, what you should expect, right? I guess the third point is you have to be adaptable. That's another very large part of moving here. I think any country, of course, you have to be adaptable. But I think Japan is very much you have to be very adaptable. In the sense that you have to be courteous or very thoughtful in all of your actions. In regards to your mannerisms, the way you speak, the way you deliver, your tone, all those kinds of things are very important. Not to say they're not in other countries, but I think it's very important in Japan. And you have to know how to adapt to this. You have to be very flexible to this. And you have to remember that it's very polite here. You have to be very polite. And if you're coming from a place that's not, you are going to definitely not be, I guess, in a good place mentally because you're going to feel, I guess, like people are more judgmental to you or something like that. Not that I experienced that, but because, yeah, obviously I've adapted to the culture. But if you can't adapt to, I guess, that kind of vibe, being polite, I know it comes hard for some people. The way they deliver things seems very, I'd say, harsh. especially when your only language is English. I think people that only speak English are very harsh in the way they deliver what they want to say. Um, so I think that's a very key difference. Um, there is no like polite words. It's more your tone, whereas Japanese, it's the a bit of both, but I think it's more polite words. Your tone can be a little off, but if your words you're saying are polite, I think it's a little more acceptable, right? Um, but yeah, it's just going to be a big change for I feel like a lot of people that want to move here. Me personally, again, this wasn't my experience because it was fine for me. But yeah, just bear that in mind. And adaptability in the way you work, um, the way you do everything, really. You have to be ready to sacrifice, I guess, your perception of how a day should be, and you have to be willing to put in the extra work. I think that's a very big key. A lot of people from Western countries are not prepared to do overtime, understandably, because that's not our culture. But here you have to be flexible. You're going to have to do overtime. That's just the reality of the situation. If you can't handle that, then don't move. It's simple as that. I mean, I can't put it any more different differently. Like you are going to have to adapt, and it's just part of moving to another country in general. But uh, moving here, you have to conform to the I guess societal construct in Japan. Not because you have to, but it's more because you feel more, I guess, included in the culture, and it actually makes your experience a lot better to feel, I guess, like you are part of the system rather than fighting against it in Japan. Um, Even though, of course, you want to be an individual, which you can be, but in terms of work, in terms of politeness, in terms of, I guess, the way you present yourself and everything like that, it's much more beneficial to be adaptable and like flexible. Not to say you change yourself, of course, but yeah, you can't be too abrasive or I don't know, just too against everything because it's very big on community here. And honestly, the sense of community is very, what's the word? I guess very nice. I mean, feeling like you're part of a whole society rather than, I feel like in Western country there isn't really that sense of community. But here in Japan, there is a sense of community, which I really think is a great benefit. But if you can't adapt to the community, then you're gonna not have a great time, right? So yeah, that's my next point is adaptability. But I'm just really waffling about like my thoughts more than a structured video, I guess. But yeah, people want to know, I guess, my honest thoughts or how I view it. So that's what I think. Obviously, for most of these points, it's not going to be from my experience, but it's from what I've been told or what I've seen. Um, but my experience overall for everything has been great because, I mean, I feel like I have a sense of that cultural difference already from from the area I lived in Australia, firstly, and then everything else. So, yeah. I think another big part of moving to Japan is being financially stable. A lot of people obviously don't have the luxury to be financially stable. Um, and I think moving to Japan, you do need a little bit of a backup in terms of there is unexpected costs you won't be thinking about and that you forget about when it comes to living in Japan. Because after 1 year, you start paying residence tax. You have to remember about that. And that's very high depending on where you live, but in certain areas it's very high. It can be like $1,000, $2,000 every quarter, so every 4 months. Um, and then on top of that, you are going to forget from moving from your country to here if you're earning money that you're now earning yen. And traveling and living is very different in terms of expenses, of course, and in terms of the way you should view money. So just remember that if you do move here and when you move here, that you have to remember you're earning yen now, and you're not earning the amount you used to, because the yen is obviously it's much harder to live here with earning the wage you earn, right? But that's why I say you should have a nest egg, or at least a little bit of backup money savings just to fall back on just in case. Um, if you don't, and I mean, not everyone is privileged enough to have that, then my suggestion, honestly, is you can move here in Japan, but it's gonna be I guess it's gonna be hard in terms of finance, because if you're going to get an apartment by yourself, you have to remember that Japan doesn't just have, like, you don't just sign a contract and pay a bond. You have to pay what they call a thank you fee. You have to pay for the agency fee. You have to pay all these other hidden costs that you forget about, right? For your initial fee. So sometimes you're looking at $5,000 Australian dollars to move in, and then you also have to pay rent on top of that. It doesn't usually cover much rent. It covers like maybe 1 or 2 months of rent. So you've paid like $5,000 to move in. You're gonna have to get all this furniture, and everything like that. So yeah, just remember that if you're moving here with no money to your name, it's gonna be hard. I honestly think it's hard, very hard to be honest. So please take that into consideration as well. Don't try and escape a bad financial situation by moving here, because you are going to be put into probably a worse one, to be honest. So yeah, just think about that. And in addition to that, I guess you need to know how to budget. So I was terrible budgeting my first year because I'm not used to getting paid monthly. Coming from Australia, it's always weekly usually. So yeah, I wasn't used to that. So my budgeting was really bad. Um, I wasn't. No, I was struggling actually. I was gonna say I wasn't struggling, but no, I definitely was. During, like, towards the end of the month, I would be eating like ramen, like literally like 80 cent ramen for like a whole week straight, because I didn't have enough money to for the last week. So yeah, don't forget about that. I had savings to fall back on, but I didn't want to use them. I don't like using my savings. So yeah, but yeah, money is a big concern. If you have no money, I highly suggest you get at least a little bit of money to fall back on. Um, and then I guess another point we can go to is maybe the socialization here. Um, I guess this links back into isolation and everything like that, but socialization is very different here, I think, in a way that I like, but not in a way that a lot of people I feel like will like. So, I mean, I go out by myself a lot. For introverts, that's probably a terrible idea, or like not a terrible idea, probably a terrible feeling, to go out and try and like make new friends. I think that's a very stressful situation for introverts. For myself, I actually really enjoy it. So socialization for me is very fun here, because in Australia, you really only have your main group of friends, right? Shout out to you guys if you're watching. I love you guys. But yeah, you have your main group. You go out with your main group. You don't really make new friends on a night out, right? Like when you go drinking or to the club. Usually, the new friends you make are going to be at work, or at school or university. Sometimes you can make them out and about, but yeah, it's not usually at a club or a bar or anything like that, right? Whereas in Japan, I've made all of my friends from bars. Or, yeah, bars or work. I mean, work is always going to be a place where you make friends, right? But yeah, so going out is very big to forming, I guess, a lot of friendships, or finding people you want to be friends with, right? So if you can't enjoy your time by yourself going out, it's going to be very difficult for you. So socialization, I think, is there's like none during the day. Like if in Tokyo at least, I can't speak on other places, but in Tokyo, most people just stay to themselves, go about their day, and that's fine. I mean, they're busy. Everyone's busy, so um, so you're not really gonna make friends when you're just during your day. I think that making friends is only really, well, from my experience, I've only made most of my friends from work or at bars. So from my experience, that's where you meet most people, or you can meet them, I guess, online, maybe, as well. But yeah, socialization's a little different. And if you struggle to go out by yourself, it's going to be probably hard for you, I would say. So yeah, just bear that in mind too for your socialization kind of life. And then I guess final topic, I don't want to make this video super long. It's going to be like 25 minutes. So final topic I want to touch on is probably work. Work's a big one. Maybe we'll do work and living expense. So work depends on the job you get. I absolutely hated my job before, being an English teacher. It was probably the worst thing I've ever done, job-wise. But yeah, my new job I love. So, you know, that's the difference. But it depends on the job you get, of course. My job doesn't require overtime, but it's because I work at an international company. But in addition to saying that, I do work a lot of overtime. Not because it's expected, but because that's my job. But most places do expect you to do some overtime. Even the international companies, really. So bear that in mind. It comes down to adaptability once again. So you're going to be working more than what you would probably in your own country. But that's me speaking, obviously, coming from Australia. I don't know your situation in another place, but yeah. And then on top of that, I guess the work culture is very different. It's a little harder, I think, to make friends at work in Japan than Australia because everyone is very obviously polite and very corporate. So it's a little harder because it's the fine line between, you know, playful and like corporate, right? My company is very, I guess, more international, so it's a little easier. But for a company, if you're going to a Japanese company, I think it becomes a bit harder. I can't speak from personal experience. This is what I've heard from my friends that are Japanese. They don't make many friends at work, or the friends that they do make at work are just to go drink with, basically. So, yeah. Remember those things when moving to Japan, and I think you'll be fine. But apart from that, the budget-wise or cost of living-wise, rent is a lot cheaper here than Australia, at least. But when you're earning yen, it's relative. You know what I mean? You make a salary, and the rent is relative to that. So if I was making the money I made in Australia here, I would be living like luxury. But obviously, I'm making yen, so I'm living really good still. But I mean, like, I would be able to eat like the most bougie food probably all the time. But yeah, like I eat really good now. I live in a good place. But of course, you know, cost of living here is relative to your wage. So cost of living, I guess, most places for one person, I guess the average rent you would expect in Tokyo, for me, when I'm looking around in Shibuya, near Shibuya and things like that, would be about, depends on the place, of course, but it's between 500 to 700 is, I think, a fair price monthly. So you're paying 500 to 700 Australian dollars per month on rent. And then food depends on if you eat out a lot or if you're cooking. If you're cooking, I think it's cheaper because you can make a lot more than obviously eating out, right? You can like store it and for the week. But if you're eating out, it's also pretty cheap. I mean, there's places that I can get a whole I can get a ramen bowl and a rice bowl together for like $10 or 1,000 yen. So really, you just have to budget like accordingly. I set a daily budget. I usually try not to exceed that daily budget. So yeah, I think cost of living is actually very doable here. So I think you're able to buy things on the side. You know, you can buy clothes and stuff and still be okay for your rent and living and everything like that. You can save money, but it is required to budget a lot if you want to save a good amount of money, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you guys have any further questions that I didn't really answer in this video I actually just waffled, I feel like, but yeah, if you have any further questions, just leave a comment, and I'll be happy to answer them, or you can shoot me a DM on Instagram, and yeah. So anyway, this video is going on for a while, so I'll catch you guys in a bit. And you know the drill. Peace and love. See you in a bit.